Good evening. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Genoa Township Board of Trustees. This is a special zoning meeting. The date is April 6th, 2022, and the time is 6:30 p.m. Joe will do roll call.
Roll call, Trustee Antonetts.
Here.
Trustee Vaughn.
Here.
Trustee Goodman.
Here. Also present, we have Joe Schaefer, Director of Development and Zoning, and Paul Benson, Deputy Zoning Inspector. This meeting of the Genoa Township Trustees will be recorded. The meeting audio and written minutes will be available on Genoa Township's website at www.genoatwp.com or by contacting the Genoa's fiscal office. First on the agenda, we are going to reschedule a hearing for the J.C. Manny Final Development Plan, which is a property that was rezoned last year on Maxtown Road. So I think we'll look at schedules. Joe, maybe you could guide us with dates of availability.
Sure. So, it's sort of the standard rules apply here. The earliest I think we could probably turn around and get something, I can confidently probably get something in the Gazette is next Tuesday, which would be the 12th. We need at least 10 days advertisement lead time before we have the meeting, so that pushes it out to at least the, be what, the 22nd or the 23rd. So you have to excuse me, I think I have the wrong date in here because I thought I was going to present this at a different time, and I'm not sure I did the math correctly. But anyway, we need at least 10 days lead time prior to the hearing to get the ad run, between the ad and the hearing. Obviously, with us having already received a lot of materials originally and the board having gotten a chance to look at it, I think the amount of lead time you probably need to review it, because I think you probably already reviewed it in terms of the hearing we were going to have, might be a little less. That said, I'd probably shoot for still something, well, see, the problem now becomes late April is because I am
Vacation.
on vacation
I
the
thought
last
so.
full week of April. So you may be looking at early May, which actually I think works out for the applicant because it sounds like they were going to be out of town to or through the 1st. Anything I think prior to that they could do virtually, but if the board's not interested in doing a virtual meeting, then it would have to be probably early first part of May.
Okay. I am open the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th of May. What is the room availability?
That is what I'm looking at right now. Let's see. The 2nd, I'm going to make sure I have the right calendar pulled up. It looks like the 2nd and 3rd are available, as is the 4th. You have a meeting on the 5th. Your regular scheduled meeting, so that's what that week currently looks like. Let me just check my personal calendar, make sure I don't have any conflicts.
Can we do it on the 5th?
You could do it as part of your regular meeting.
Yeah.
There's nothing that says you can't. It's just a question of, you want to, I don't know how long it's going to take.
Yeah.
Prior iterations of the board didn't like doing that, but I don't think it's always a bad idea, especially if it's one that you don't think you're going to get a ton of public comment on, and if it's something you've already seen, which this one you have because you did the rezoning.
My preference
already.
is to keep it separate, but if I don't know, what's your preference?
Normally, I don't care. I think on this one, I need to keep it separate in my mind because there were a number of questions on the materials that were previously submitted. And I want sufficient time to review that and then also to have appropriate discussion if there's public comment or just our questions. And I don't want to take that time away from a trustee meeting.
I'm sorry, on the 4th, the Parks Committee is in here, so we bumped them for tonight, so.
Yeah, but I'm thinking maybe May they'll meet at a park. That's the goal.
Oh,
If
okay. Yeah, they're
if
still
the-
on the facility calendar as being here, but.
they hold it in case of inclement weather,
Sense.
but maybe I'm thinking by May.
And
But-
I'm okay with 2nd, 3rd, or 4th.
Okay, so I am too. So I'd prefer to stay away from the 4th then because of parks.
Sure. You want to do the 3rd then?
Third's, well, you know what? That's the last day of the police advisory committees, so, or the citizens.
Oh, so you
And,
probably,
and I missed it last night. So if we can do the second, I prefer that, so I don't have.
yeah, that
That's the last one.
should work. Let me just check my calendar here. Sorry.
If not, we'll do the third.
I think the third works better for me only because
Okay.
based on your experience, I'm driving on my vacation, but just in the off chance I get
It's fine.
delayed,
Third it is.
maybe build a buffer.
The third it is.
Sorry.
You're good? All right, so May 3rd at 6:30.
Yeah. I'll put you down
And then
for 6:30.
materials are due.
I guess however long in advance you want to review stuff and provide the public adequate time to look at anything. Now that we're having it on the 3rd, we have more than adequate enough time to really run the ad and probably review stuff, so. I guess really in a week or two, I think would be
So by the 20th,
reasonable.
April 20th? That's 2 weeks from today.
Let me see here. Yeah, I mean, that works for me. I would think 2 weeks is a fair enough lead time. So you want to do materials due by the 20th? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, we can make that happen.
I move to schedule the public meeting for ZC 2022-02 J.C. Manning Final Development Plan on Monday, May 3rd, 2022 at 6:30 PM in the Township Hall. Materials will be due to the Development and Zoning Office by April 20th, 2022 at 4 PM.
Second, however, I think that's Tuesday, May 3rd, not Monday.
Thank you.
So with
Yes,
that amendment,
Tuesday.
I will second.
Thank you. I'll second your amendment if I have to.
We'll cover it somehow.
All right. Ready for roll call?
Yes.
Trustee Antonetts?
Abstain.
Trustee Goodman?
Yes.
Trustee Vaughn?
Yes. All right, next, we have case number ZC 2021-04, zoning text amendment, map amendment. So I read this motion? This is like a
Yep,
new...
you'll read it just like a
it's
development one,
okay,
so read
got
the
it.
legal description and all that.
Okay, so I'll call the following hearing to order at 6:38 PM for the legal notice, and I ask everyone wishing to speak on this matter to stand and be sworn in. Anybody? If you think you might speak, I suggest you raise your hand and stand up and be sworn in. Overlay, yes, yes. We're starting, thank you. All right, do you swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. All right, so Genoa Township trustees initiated the zoning text and map amendment, ZC 2021-04, to create a Hoover Watershed Overlay District, Article 7, along with minimal amendments to current articles related to the creation of said district and zoning administration. The legal notice for this meeting was printed and published on March 15th, 2022 in the Delaware Gazette and posted in the Genoa Township Hall on March 3rd, 2022. The following were marked as Exhibits A through J. Exhibit A, legal notice. Exhibit B, affidavit of advertisement. Exhibit C, sign-in sheet. Exhibit D, zoning text map amendment dated February 14th, 2022. Exhibit E, list of all parcels to be included within the Hoover Watershed Overlay District dated February 14th, 2022. Exhibit F, DCRPC recommendation made September 30th, 2021. Exhibit G, trustee acknowledgement of the zoning commission's recommendation made on March 3rd, 2022. Exhibit H, staff memo dated April 1st, 2022 and April 6th, 2022. Exhibit I, staff presentation dated April 6th, 2022. Exhibit J, all public comments received between September 2nd, 2021 and April 6th, 2022. So at this time, I'll ask Joe Schaefer to give a staff report.
Thank you, Trustee Vaughn. In lieu of reading the memorandum I prepared for you this evening, I prepared this PowerPoint presentation. Provides a little bit of visual explanations to some things that are just hard to put down into paper, and it's just frankly a little more interesting than me reading off a piece of paper. So I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can, because I know people probably didn't come here to hear me talk. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are eager to make their comments this evening. So we're going to just start with the challenge. I know the board knows a lot of this stuff because the board is the one who initiated the document, and Mr. Antonetz knows a lot about this, having been on the zoning commission prior to the trustees and having reviewed this document at the zoning commission level. So I'm really doing this more for the benefit of those in the audience and people at home, and as well as just sort of for the record. So the challenge here is establish zoning regulations which allow for reasonable economic use of property, i.e. development, are consistent with the visions and goals set forth in the township's comprehensive plan, and address the public's ongoing concerns regarding development and density to the greatest extent practical and possible under law, particularly in vulnerable areas north of Big Walnut Road and east of Hoover Reservoir. And that third bullet point is really the main thing. The first and second bullet point are really what we do with zoning all the time, with anything we do. It's the third bullet point. There's a lot of development pressure going on, especially in those areas I mentioned. So we've been hearing a lot of those comments over the years. So we wanted to make an attempt to see what we can do to address those comments. I'm not going to go through all of this. I do plan on probably posting this to the website. It's obviously a public document. We can make it available upon request. This is sort of just a really, I would call it brief, history of just zoning related to this topic in general in the township throughout the years. I always start with 1987 as my baseline because, number one, it's well over 30 years ago, so it's a pretty significant period of time. In 1987 was also when Genoa Township sort of entered the modern age of zoning. We used to have two zoning codes here in the township, one for east of Tussock and one for west of Tussock, and it was like that from the 50s and through the 80s. And in 1987, they finally combined the codes, one zoning resolution that regulated the entirety of the township. It was a huge effort, so that's why usually when I do these history things, that's about where I start, because a lot of our zoning and planning efforts sort of stem from those efforts. And you can see through the years all the different things we've done. Probably the one thing I do want to point out on this slide is the original zoning code in 1987 contained what it was called the Critical Resources Area District. This is interesting because the CRA, which it was commonly known as, is essentially the original Hoover overlay. It was a zoning district established for properties in the Hoover watershed that established certain regulations and more strict regulations because of the need to protect the watershed. I think there was a minimum lot size of 1 acre. It functioned as a standard straight zoning district, much like rural residential and suburban residential do. So in that vein, it wasn't an overlay, it was a traditional zoning district. But I just pointed out because the concept of dealing with the Hoover watershed is not a new concept for Genoa. It's something that has been done before. The CRA got removed from the zoning code in around 1999 after the comprehensive plan from that time was put in place, replaced with rural residential zoning, and that's when they sort of moved to trying to control planning and development using the planning areas in the comprehensive plan that we know today. So I could go on and on about each one of those items individually, but I'll spare you all of that. If there's any specific questions about any of those items, I'm more than happy to dive into those, but I didn't want to bore everyone with the zoning history lesson. So as we look at what we're doing zoning-wise, there's a lot of factors we have to consider of what's going on in the region. Columbus is the fastest growing metro in the Midwest. Its growth, frankly, pales in comparison to what's happening down south in the Sun Belt, but for the Midwest, Columbus is growing extremely fast. By 2050, the regional planning organizations expect we're going to grow by almost another 1 million people. That's a lot of people. We know some of them, not all, hopefully a lot of them go other places, but there's a good chance some of them are going to want to move to Genoa. Delaware County is the fastest growing county in all of Ohio. We're just over 200,000 people right now, over 24% increase since the last census. You can see the projections there. It's starting to slow down, but we're still going to see growth here in the county over the next couple decades. I think everyone in the room is now aware that Intel is building a chip plant just outside our border. I mean, I know to some it seems like it's relatively far away, but when you look at a map and you zoom out, it's not that far away. In the next couple of years, additional I-71 interchanges, the one just south of 3637 I saw in the Gazette today, has funding from ODOT. I don't know if there's a construction date yet for it, but it is getting funding now. It seems like the big Walnut interchange is behind the Sunbury interchange, and I'm not aware of where it stands in funding or prioritization, but it does seem like the one up by the outlets is getting priority at this point. And then if you haven't heard, ODOT is also studying Route 23 from Delaware down into 270. They call it the Route 23 Connect study, trying to figure out what, if anything, can be done to improve those conditions, whether it's upgrade 23 somehow and or do some sort of bypass over to 71 or over in the Marysville area. So there's a lot going on in the region. More locally, factors to consider, sewer availability is a game changer. One of the big game changers that happened in Genoa was early 2000s when Vinmar Farms was approved and that lift station that services that development went in. That lift station essentially made sewer available in a good portion of the township that had never had sewer before, and so planned development was really not something that was possible. When that lift station went in, it really changed the scope and possibilities for that portion of the township. That said, for years, we sort of had been hearing that there was very limited capacity and it could only do so much. And that was even sort of a little bit of the vibe I was getting when I first started here in late 2015. However, at that time, I can tell you the county was actively working on upgrading its sewer plans and was in the middle of a study, which the township conducted its own mini study regarding sewer and density. As part of that, I get the impression as a result of that over the years, the issue of capacity has almost become a non-issue for the county. When I ask, I don't get a number or told, well, we can only service X amount of units or this type of density or, yeah, you can only go so far. When I'm asking the question, I'm basically being told there's no capacity. If you start thinking about doing apartments, just let us know so we're aware. But so a lot of the sewer capacity limitations that I think used to be in place and were the foundation of some of those old regulations just frankly don't seem to be there anymore. So we've got to take that in consideration. Columbus is actively in the process of running a sewer line up to Smothers Road. Frankly, that will probably impact Harlem Township way more than it's going to impact us because a lot of our land in that southeast quadrant is Lake of the Woods. It's already sort of developed. There's really not much else you can do with it. But it does mean we're probably going to see a lot of development happen across the border if that sewer eventually goes in, especially if there's annexation pressures from Columbus or New Albany push out that direction. And then obviously we have the Galena sewer plant that opened a couple years ago, which is now open sewer capacity for the village to provide properties that wish to develop and more than likely join the village if they were to do that. So a lot has changed in regard to sewer over the past probably 10, 20 years. Also in regards to septic, requirements for septic have changed. I just looked into this the other week. There's really no minimum lot size requirement anymore for septic systems. It's basically reviewed almost on a case-by-case basis now based on the type of system, the soils, the location, a whole bunch of variables. That's important because a lot of the old zoning requirements were based off the fact that there was minimum lot size requirements for sewer. In fact, I think that may be where the current 2-acre lot size requirement for rural residential came from, because once upon a time, the county's requirement was they wanted 2 acres. They wanted large lots on septic to essentially be large enough to not only accommodate one septic system, but I always heard the story that they wanted enough room for a second system if the first one failed. At least that's the story I've always heard. But that's not the case anymore. So it's just something to keep in mind as we look at zoning and how things have changed. Annexation pressures, there's obviously always been the pressure from Westerville, which is, frankly, not as much pressure anymore because there's so much development now at the southern end of the township. Westerville's interest has seemed to have ebbed on that front, because their whole interest was being able to control the development that happened. That's why they wanted involvement with that land, so they could dictate what happened on that land. Well, since that land's developed, there's not as much of an incentive anymore for them to look. But we do, like I mentioned with Galena, have to think about possibility of Galena looking south into Genoa. I can tell you, if you look at Galena's planning documents, there's 300 acres on the east side of the water that they call out that they anticipate possibly serving. So it's out there. It's a possibility. They're not there yet. Obviously, it would have to be, I think, contiguous unless the law changes. So they're not there yet, but it's on their radar. So we need to keep that in mind. We obviously get continued requests for rezoning and development, especially it's pushing north of Big Walnut into areas where we historically have not seen it. And then obviously we always have redevelopment and infill going on the smaller lots and lots that are probably ripe to be reused as something else. So the proposed solution, I think we're all pretty much aware here now, is right now the proposed Hoover Watershed Overlaid District. That's the concept we currently have come up with. That's the concept the board initiated late last year and asked the Zoning Commission to review and provide feedback on. So why Hoover? The watershed covers most of the areas where further development is a concern. Increased development pressure in this area, as I just mentioned. The watershed boundary is generally a non-arbitrary, naturally occurring and officially recognized feature defined by the U.S. Geological Survey. It's a significant landmark and a community icon. You can see it comprises a significant amount of percentage of the township there, especially when you factor in the watershed. It's Hoover Reservoir plus the watershed is closing on almost 50% of the acreage of Genoa Township. Important habitat for plants and wildlife. Obviously, key resource for fitness, recreation, and education, all those activities I have listed there that everyone enjoys. Columbus Schools has the Nature Center out there on the east side. It's an economic value for the local businesses. People who come and frequent the reservoir obviously are going to patronize the businesses. Anecdotally, it seems like it does help with property values, judging by the size and types of homes I'm seeing built, especially on the water on the east side. Aesthetics and quality of life, pretty straightforward to understand how it positively contributes to that, and also drinking water for the city of Columbus. So why an overlay? So with zoning has to always concern itself about equal protection uniformity requirements, meaning we have to treat properties equally, and requirements within a zoning district have to generally be applied uniformly and generally can't differ due to geographic location within a zoning district. So it makes it hard to say, in this zoning district, we're okay with this in this area, but that's not okay with it over here. So we've got to figure out a way to work around that. So an overlay allows us to do that. It allows us to treat properties sharing similar characteristic, in this case, the watershed, the same, even if their base zoning districts are different from one another. Development patterns outside of the watershed, especially south of Big Walnut Road, are more diverse, dense, and intense in nature, which is why we haven't really looked at doing anything down there. It's just a different animal down there. So the process, just going through and educating everyone how we got to where we are this evening. So staff originally introduced this concept to the Zoning Commission back in 2018 when we were discussing what we were going to do with PRD and how to improve PRD. And it was one of the ideas I threw out there to the commission as a possibility. The commission at the time decided not to implement the concept and instead just amend the existing PRD zoning regs, which resulted in a complete overhaul of the PRD setbacks, buffer requirements, planning requirements, which were ultimately adopted in 2019, and they're essentially the requirements we know today. Trustee Goodman reintroduced the concept on August 5th, 2021 during a trustees meeting. The board held a brief discussion on the matter and ultimately directed staff to prepare a draft for them to look over and decide whether or not they wanted to push it forward. I will say I engaged with verbal conversations with a couple different attorneys regarding just the general high-level concept in late last year, just to make sure it was even that the rough idea sounded plausible, and I got positive feedback that it was. Because we didn't want to go forward if even the rough concept didn't sound like it was going to work. Trustees reviewed the draft I prepared and voted to initiate the document for public review and review by the commission in accordance with Ohio law on September 2nd of last year. Per Ohio law, we had to send it to Regional Planning Commission for recommendation, which they provided a recommendation of approval on September 30th of last year. And I know there was some concerns about the county agencies not being involved. DCRPC membership includes all of the county agencies that are involved with development. Engineering, soil and water, public health, the building departments, even the county commissioners have a seat at the table. Economic development sits in sometimes with the county commissioners, plus all the other townships and villages that are due-paying members of the Regional Planning Commission. So they would have all seen this during that meeting. The Zoning Commission held their required public hearing on the amendment over the span of 3 meetings in October, December, and just this past February on Valentine's Day. Delaware County Prosecutor's Office did a legal review and provided us comments on October 12th of last year. Copies of the amendment were sent to all communities adjacent to the Hoover Reservoir watershed in late October of last year. I don't recall receiving any specific feedback from any of them. The Zoning Commission recommended adoption on February 14th, a couple months ago. Trustees acknowledged the recommendation on March 3rd, as you heard in the exhibit list, and here we are this evening with this presentation. So that's how we got here. So what does the overlay do? It tightens regulations applicable to any new proposed developments. Oh, sure, I'm sorry. Sometimes I get rolling because I'm eager to get to the comments. It tightens regulations applicable to any new proposed developments within the subject area. The permitted maximum density in the resolution would be lowered under the overlay. The perimeter open space buffer requirements are increased. Some of those buffers are going to be required to be undisturbed buffers. There's also native vegetation requirements now for those buffers in the overlay. Larger setbacks from Hoover Reservoir and primary conservation areas, which I'll get into more detail on that in a moment. And 75% of the lots with dwellings must be adjacent to an open space. It also encourages stormwater basins to be wet or naturalized. It reduces the number of permitted land uses and generally tries to encourage ones that are less intense and non-automobile oriented. Discourages cul-de-sacs, dead-end streets, and common access driveways, and reduces the maximum permitted lot coverage and cumulative building size for non-residential uses. Just for everyone's edification in terms of how it functions, the base districts under the overlay would still likely need to be rezoned to allow for new planned residential neighborhoods. And I'm even going to strengthen that more, remove that likely. The base district would need to be rezoned to allow for new planned residential neighborhoods under this overlay, as well as for any additional non-residential development if the property isn't already zoned for that. So that means all rural residential and suburban residential zone properties are eligible for planned residential zoning if public sanitary sewer were available to them, which that is the case now. So this overlay doesn't change that fact. The current comprehensive plan recommends non-residential development not be allowed beyond where current zoning permits. This overlay doesn't change that either. So if the township does not want to see further non-residential development in this area, it's completely within your power because there's very limited area zoned for non-residential use in this watershed. And the only other uses that are operating non-residentially are largely non-conforming uses that are basically locked into what they're doing now and can't really change at this point. So let's get into the meat of it. First, let's compare what the current zoning resolution permits for rural residential, what the proposed amendment is going to change, and what the difference is. For rural residential, it's really easy. This overlay proposes making no changes to any dimensional requirements relative to rural residential. Lot sizes remain the same, the frontage requirements remain the same, all the setbacks remain the same, building height, building impervious coverage, this does not change any of it. Same thing with the requirements regarding driveways, minimum floor areas, garages, none of that's changing for the rural residential zoning district under this overlay. The overlay does not prohibit new home expansions, new accessory buildings or structures, fences, walls, etc. in the rural residential. All those rights that currently exist and people can do in rural residential will continue to exist. The only additional land use that would now be permitted in rural residential, as the overlay is currently drafted, are marinas, sailing boat clubs, docks, wet or dry, and associated storage. That was my original draft. I can tell you I've had somewhat of an epiphany since I did this. I actually, if this were to go forward, would recommend some sort of revision regarding the dry docks, so we don't accidentally permit dry docks or boat storage on inland lots as a use by right. When I put this use in there, I thought, oh, well, no one would want to do this on a lot that isn't already bordering Hoover Reservoir proper, the water itself. But then I got thinking about, oh, dry docks and associated storage. I could see someone in the Watershed that doesn't have frontage on Hoover but wants to start some boat storage business saying, oh, great, I don't even need to rezone. I can just do it under the rural residential as a use by right. That's not what we want, and that was not my intention. So I do think if we're going to move forward, we want to think about that verbiage, either whether just striking that use out completely or revising it to make it a more limited use. The other reason I put it in there is, as you know, we have some marinas and some of those sailing boat clubs on the water right now. So it would sort of codify them as technically being allowed under the current code. So density, I know that's the big topic, judging by the emails, the public comments we've been receiving. So this chart compares the density figures that are on the books right now. What's on the books in the comprehensive plan, what's on the books in the zoning resolution, and what is proposed in the amendment. And then at the very right side of the table, you can see the difference between the amendment and the current zoning resolution. So the current comprehensive plan doesn't have any specific density recommendations, as I think a lot of people know. It basically defers to the zoning resolution. The specific numbers were removed by a prior iteration of the board about 3 years ago due to the conflict they were posing. The conflict we've had trouble rectifying with those numbers was the number in the zoning resolution, which prevails legally in enforcement, was higher than the comp plan number. So when the rubber came to meet the road, we kept having developers pointing at the zoning resolution and saying, well, your zoning code, which is your law, says I can do this. So that's great, your comprehensive plan has a lower number, but your zoning code allows me to do a higher number. And that's the number I'm going to go with, and that's the number I think I'm entitled to. It was causing a lot of conflict and confusion because a lot of people were wanting us to enforce the lower comp plan numbers. So the board at the time decided their solution to fix that conflict for the time being was to just remove the specific numbers from the comp plan and just defer to the zoning resolution. I never thought that to be a permanent solution to the situation. It did temporarily eliminate the conflict, but I always knew we were probably going to have to circle back to this issue and continue to try to figure out how we were going to address the density concerns of the community.
Just excuse me, one question for clarification. The prior slide is talking about rural residential,
Yes,
right? And now this is talking about planned residential.
correct. Yes, thank you.
These are two
Different
things.
zoning
Can
code,
you
yes.
kinda clarify that?
Absolutely, thank you. Yep, thank you for asking that question. So yeah, density, when we talk density specifically refers to the number of dwelling units per acre, or in this case per net developable acre, permitted in what we call planned residential districts. So a planned residential district would be like the zoning classification, you see a Vinmar Farms or a Medallion or something like that, in where planned residential developments came to be in Ohio law several decades ago because they were finding conventional zoning was too rigid and strict and was requiring a lot of variances to build more innovative type of developments. So the planned development concept was developed to allow for a little bit more flexibility in the code and divergences in hopes of, well, we'll make it a little bit easier to massage the requirements if you get a development you like. They didn't want the zoning, they didn't want a good development that everyone liked to be stopped by the pure fact that there was 10 different zoning conflicts under the straight district. So this plan district came up with a way of being a lot more flexible and also providing a mechanism to get relief from the code that didn't require going to the BZA. Because going to the BZA, legal standards for variances are different, they're higher, they're more stringent. It was also adding a lot of time onto the development process because now there was multiple boards getting involved and it was just becoming messy. So PRD was a way that planned developments was a mechanism the state came up with to try to streamline that, in which a lot of communities have since implemented in their codes. So yeah, when we talk density, we're not talking rural residential 2-acre lots. We're talking about stuff like Medallion or like any new development like the one that's being proposed right now on Big Walnut Road next to the police station. So as you can see, the zoning resolution has two different density standards right now in PRD. If you develop without what we call conservation development standards, which means essentially less open space, primarily, we only let you, by the zoning resolution, go up to 1.8 units per net developable acre. If you do what we call conservation development standards, which essentially means you are giving us 10% more of your gross area, dedicating that towards open space, one of the trade-offs is, well, we'll let you go with a higher density, up to 2.2 units per net developable acre. And those have been the numbers for quite some time in the zoning code. Under the overlay, and there's never been a density maximum, as far as I know, for the Planned Community Facilities District. Now, the PCF district is a little bit of a different animal because you typically don't see single-family dwelling type of developments in the PCF district. Planned Community Facilities is stuff like Genoa Baptist Church and Christian Academy, and probably an even better example is, and I'm probably going to mispronounce it, Fairdine Commons is a PCF district, where it's more designed, a community facility, senior housing type of thing. But there's no density maximum right now. So one of my concerns as I was putting this together is I would never want someone to use PCF as a backdoor to get higher density because there's technically no max there and come up with some use that they feel like they can use as an excuse to use that district as opposed to PRD. So what this overlay does is reduces the maximum permitted density for PRDs that are allowed in the zoning resolution to either 1.35 without conservation development standards or 1.65 with conservation development standards. And you can see what the difference is between the two documents. And then it also establishes a maximum density for that PCF district, knowing that if you ever got a planned community facility that was like a Fairdine and it was a good use, but the density just was higher than that number, you can always diverge that number away. But we at least wanted a baseline number so people just, it wasn't just the Wild West and people could ask for whatever they want and we had really no defense against it. So we now at least drawn a line in the sand there. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, yes, the overlay numbers are higher than what the comprehensive plan that existed prior to 2019 was for some of these areas. Planning areas 2 and 3 under the older version of the comp plan had no density recommendations essentially because PRD was not anticipated to happen there. It was just 2-acre lots, essentially. As you can see during my presentation, sewer is coming at that area from both directions, and we knew that a couple years ago that that was probably on the horizon, which is why the comp plan now anticipates PRD in those areas. Because if we don't anticipate it and don't regulate it, and we get a request, it becomes really hard to deal with because we technically would have no rules on the book or anything to fall back on. So this puts guardrails on an area that really didn't have guardrails, and currently, if a PRD was to be applied for in that area, if sewer somehow got there, it could go up to 2.2 units per acre. So we're trying to address that issue. Under the old comp plan, I think planning area 4, you could max out at 0.75. Obviously, these numbers are higher. And then planning area 5, so planning area 4 is essentially the west side of Hoover Reservoir, north of Big Walnut Road, roughly east of 3, sort of our general vicinity here, just across the street. Planning area 5 is roughly the northwest quadrant of the township, north of Big Walnut, west of 3, over to Orange and Berkshire Township lines. The comp plan for planning area 5 had recommended no higher than 1.35. So obviously these numbers are a little bit higher than that. Moving on, and I'm sorry, yes?
Just one other clarification, because again, you do this as a day job and all this stuff makes sense to you, but if you go back.
I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna bring the mic over to you because we're recording this and it's hard for people on the recording. As long as the trustees are.
Can you say your name?
Yeah, Caroline Ramsey. I live on Cupstone and Galena. Can you go back to the previous slide, please? Just so it's clear, because it's a little foggy to me. So can you just translate the 1.8 units NDA versus 1.35? What does that mean? Like 1.8 of a house on an acre? Please translate that.
Sure. So the way we look at density, sorry, I'll get back on the microphone. The way we look at density when we say net units per net developable acre is, let's say you've got, I'm gonna use the number 100 because it's easy math for me. Say you've got a 100-acre parcel that someone wants to develop. Under our zoning code, we don't let you calculate the density over that full 100 acres. We know some of that acreage is gonna be streets, infrastructure, so we don't let you take credit for that density. So we come up with what is known as a net developable area, which is just roughly ballpark 85% of the tract, which could even go lower if you've got wetlands or some other things that we also don't count towards that calculation. But for the sake of easy math, let's say 100 becomes 85. You essentially are allowed 1.8 units per that net developable acre. So 1.8 times 85 tells the developer how many units by code, dwellings by code they'd be allowed to put on that property. That's how the math works. Then obviously as the numbers change, that 1.8 changes to whatever the number is. So under my scenario, instead of 1.8, you'd have to take that 85 now times 1.35, which obviously you're gonna get a lower number. You're gonna get less units. So that's how that works.
I think the struggle is because they're not.
Mike, bring it with you.
And I'm speaking for myself also, is when you use, you're not using whole digit numbers, it's hard to wrap your head around how you're gonna put an eighth of a house on an acre.
Correct. And
So the explanation is you take the sum of the whole PRD, all the number of houses, and you divide it by the developable acreage, and if it's more than 1.8, then they're outside the zoning requirement. Does that make sense?
yeah, that's sort of the other way to look at it. So usually when you do those calculations, like what I was explaining, we always just round down to the nearest whole number. So if you come out at 37.8, your number is 37, not 38. At least that's how I've always administered it.
One more question from here.
Hold on. If you could, we need people speaking into the mic.
If it's easier, I can sit at the table and do this, that way people can come up to the
Fine.
lectern. Okay, I'll just do
Fine.
that.
And if it's your first time to speak, if you could say your name and address for the record.
Fred Burry, 6900 Sunbury Road. I would like a clarification on the PRD. Today, are certain properties classified as a PRD, or can any classification be applied for to be treated as a PRD?
That's a great question. So PRD is a zoning, so planned districts in Ohio cannot come to be unless the property owner or someone representing the property owner requests it. So that means we can't plan out and say where PRD is absolutely 100% gonna go and not gonna go. Every property owner technically has the right to ask for a planned development as long as it's consistent with our comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan basically says any residential zone property, suburban residential or rural residential, could possibly become PRD if it's serviced by sewer. Just because it'd be hard for us to say no, because once sewer comes to a property, it becomes hard to justify, well, 1 acre lot sizes or 2 acre lot sizes, because density and lot size restrictions historically have been based on, because there's some sort of infrastructure restriction in place that's keeping them causing them to be that large. When those restrictions essentially go away, the reason for having those larger lot sizes sort of tends to go away. And candidly, I get the impression that sewer and density and large lot sizes is maybe how we lost a lot of that acreage in the southern end of the township once upon a time. The township wanted to see low density, didn't want a lot of the PRD development. Those developers said, okay, knocked on Westerville's door, got annexed, and that's how now well over 1,000 acres that used to be Genoa Township are now part of the city of Westerville. So for those of you who aren't familiar, County Line Road is named County Line because it's the separation between Franklin County and Delaware County. Genoa Township used to go all the way down to Delaware County Line Road. We now almost just barely get to Maxtown in sections, and sometimes even a little further than that. A lot of stuff on Polaris Parkway, where Meyer is, T. Marzetti, Ohio Health, the rec center, all of that West Star development was all Genoa Township, and we lost it. So, and some of that happened as early as the 50s and 60s, and some of it happened as recently as the mid-90s. And a couple of smaller annexations have happened since, but the last major one was in 95. So essentially, the yellow on this map are the PRD districts.
I would just like to clarify that a PRD, according to our zoning resolution, requires a plot of 25 or more acres.
Correct.
So Mr. Schaefer said anybody with my little .3 acre, I can't request a PRD.
Thank you.
But there are ways that if you have 19 acres, you could ask for a divergence. So you need to have a reasonable amount of land to do this. As I said, 25 in the zoning resolution is the minimum that we recommend. Thank you.
So if that's the case, and I'm not sure if this is appropriate at this point or for comments, but why, if the goal of this overlay district is for the PRDs, why do something that affects over 2,000 properties that wouldn't be a PRD? Why put on these new restrictions for existing properties that aren't eligible for PRD?
Sure, that's a fair question. There's a couple of answers to that. Number one, as I alluded to earlier, we can't just make the change in the existing PRD district and say, okay, properties located here, we're going to treat this way, but properties over here, we're going to treat differently. Properties within the same zoning classification, my understanding is generally have to be treated equally and uniformly. So we can't say in the PRD district, if you're in this location, your density is this. If you're in this location, your density is this. It's my understanding we're not allowed to do that. So we can't just amend the PRD and put different densities in different locations. So is my understanding. Again, not an attorney.
Does that answer your question? Or are you still?
Well, part
still
two of that
explaining?
is, again, we can't pick and choose when you create zoning districts, you also have to sort of have a rationale for why you've picked the properties you did. It becomes a real hard argument when you start picking and choosing, well, we're going to do this property, this property, and this property, and this property, because again, you start treating properties that are somewhat similarly situated unequally. So generally when you see an overlay, it's based on, a lot of times they're based on like corridors, like Orange Township, I think has or is working on one along Route 23. All the properties that front Route 23 in these certain areas fall within that overlay, regardless of whether they actually are already developed or not, or could be developed, because things can always change. We are responsible for anticipating and planning ahead and thinking, what if this does change? It may seem unlikely, but what if it does? What's the plan going to be? How are we going to react to it? So that's really what we're doing here, is trying to figure out what are we going to do if this changes. Also, we also know a property that's 5 acres in of its own may not be able to develop the PRD. But sometimes when PRDs happen, a developer will buy multiple properties that are adjacent to one another. They may be owned by the same person, they may be owned by a couple different people. They can do an assemblage then and then try to rezone all those properties together as one single PRD tract. So we don't know what's going to happen in the future, what kind of assemblages could happen. I can't rely on these existing property lines are going to be this way forever. Properties are going to sell, properties are going to be subdivided, things are going to continue to happen. So we have to think about what if, and we have to treat everything uniformly. So that's why we've done this approach. And that's also why, because I knew there was going to be a lot of concern from those who probably are not interested in developing their properties or can't really develop their properties, that they didn't want the rules for their property as they exist now to change, which is why you saw that slide for rural residential where I said, nothing's changing. When I was drafting this, I knew people weren't probably interested in seeing changes, nor did I want to propose any. So that's why the rules for RR aren't changing, but we are saying if that property does get rezoned to a planned development, we want more strict rules in place than what are on the books now. So that's the explanation on that. So I hope I didn't get too in the weeds. This gets very technical, I understand.
I think the takeaway is if you live on a 1 or 2 acre lot and you've owned that, or that house was built 20, 30 years ago, you may not be the original owner, but the rules for you won't change until or unless somebody comes in, a developer buys it and buys a bunch of properties that get close to 25 acres, which is our minimum amount of acreage to have to rezone, then these rules apply. But if that never happens, your property will remain the same for now and forever.
Yeah, the only other contingency there would be if the township were ever interested in doing commercial or industrial zoning in this area, which, like I said, it's not on the books, it's not in the comprehensive plan, no one is expressing any interest in doing that. But if a future iteration of the board did do that, we've now put some guardrails in place that say, if that board does that, there's still gonna be rules in place that don't allow for big box development, for auto-centric developments that are, ugly uses that aren't conducive to the character of that area. That acreage requirement is less than that 25, but again, the chance of that happening is much smaller because the comp plan does not recommend it.
All right, do you have more?
Thanks for allowing those clarifications. And so based on this mathematical.
Can you come to the mic, please? Sorry, we get angry people who listen to this later.
I know. It's Caroline Ramsey again. Thanks for allowing these questions for clarification during your presentation. I appreciate that. I know it messes up the flow a little bit, but I think it helps us all. And so just based on the previous slide there that you showed with the calculations, no.
Oh,
just
the
go
density
one
numbers?
back. Go one back.
Yep.
No, yeah, so again, I want to clarify. So what you're proposing is less houses per area than what currently exists?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Currently exists in our comprehensive plan, not currently exist as homes in this area. Most homes in this area are built on 1 acre or more.
Right, but in the statute.
Yes, in the code.
So moving on with the comparison for PRDs, this will be easy. So you can see here's the existing current zoning resolution requirements in regards to open space requirements for the PRDs. The overlay isn't changing those percentages. Those are already relatively pretty high numbers anyway. I wasn't sure it was going to make sense to go higher. And frankly, one of the things that's hard to really illustrate here is if you take a piece of land and you were just to draw like a square, or take an existing development for that matter, and apply these rules now to developments that have happened, you're going to see, absent of the density restriction, when you factor in the open space requirements and these buffers and 75% of lots have to be against open space, you're going to find just by those facts alone, developers are not going to be able to fit as many houses on a tract as they could, because they have to do all that other stuff. So it just shrinks the area that they even could put houses in to begin with before they even start trying to figure out, okay, well, am I at the density level? So that's just an important thing to point out, but it's hard to illustrate that here. The perimeter buffer requirements. I won't go through every single one of these numbers because you can see them on the screen, but they're essentially getting bigger in every aspect, except for the setback from the right-of-way is essentially from arterial and collectors isn't changing because 170 feet is already pretty big. But for any portion of a tract that's being developed that's up against Hoover, they have to maintain a 100-foot setback from that shared property line with the parcel containing Hoover that's owned by the city of Columbus. The first 50 feet have to be undisturbed. The second 50 feet have to be, they can be disturbed, but more disturbed with open space amenities, landscaping, and stuff like that, clubhouses and stuff. But that first 50 feet would have to be undisturbed. And then it's a 100-foot setback from any other adjacent property to that tract. I think I'm hearing a question out in the audience.
Come up, speak.
Maria Calderon, excuse me, 4361 Sunbury Road, Galena. What property along Hoover does Columbus, what is the footage? You said, I heard 100 in there, and I did not.
So Columbus owns basically that big, everything, all the land surrounding the big blue thing labeled Hoover Reservoir. Plus, that's also why, if you see that strip of land that is
Yeah, well, wait a
not
minute.
zoned, not hatched in,
Yes.
that's also owned by Columbus, and that was just a function of GIS. So I'll go up to the screen here and point it out because it's probably easier.
But I thought there was an actual
I
distance.
thought, do they own so far from the water?
That's what I'm saying.
They actually have deeded property lines.
Okay, so does it
Because the
vary?
water elevation changes,
Varies, okay.
there are actual physical property lines. So like if you own a property near Hoover, you probably share a property with City of Columbus, and trust me, I'm sure the city knows where that line is.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it varies depending on the lot.
It does.
Yeah,
Significantly.
what that distance is from the water.
So the setback gets measured from the property line, not from the water elevation, because the water elevation changes, and we never know day to day what that's gonna be.
Okay, so the marker that I have down, I'm on Spruce Run or something
Mm-hmm.
like that, yeah. And that marker that's down there, that's their permanent marker
Mm-hmm.
indicating the distance.
So just a hypothetical, I know you're not interested in developing your property, or I assume you're not. But if someone were to develop your property, that 100 feet would have to start where that measurement would have to start where that sign is inward into your property before anything could happen.
Oh,
So that
Okay,
first 100
got
feet
it.
from that
Okay.
sign into your property,
Yeah.
they would not be allowed to do anything in terms
Okay.
of buildings or houses or anything.
or marinas, or,
The marina is would probably be a little bit different only because it's a marina. We'd probably have to deal with that on a special case basis.
I mean, is that not a commercial business?
It is. It's a little bit of there's a little bit of a conflict there admittedly, because if you're having a marina, you're probably gonna be right on the water. That'd probably be something during the zoning process they'd have to ask for a divergence for, with their explanation being, we're a marina, of course, we're on the water. We're gonna need some relief to the code requirement here if you're okay with the marina going here.
I have one question that's really distantly related to all of this.
Mhm.
Who designates the use of powerboats, et cetera, on Hoover? I
The
mean,
city.
right now, huh?
The city.
Columbus?
Mhm.
Okay, so we don't have anything to do with that. So that, okay. good.
Same with the docks, all the dock access on,
Right.
it all falls under the city.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
Okay. I think I covered the or the buffers there. I'll move on. We have other types of setbacks required for these developments. Number one is the critical resource protection setback. We currently have no setbacks for lots containing Hoover. Again, we now have the 100-foot that I just mentioned. We have an existing 20-foot setback requirement from primary conservation areas. So essentially, when the developer is putting these plans together, primary conservation areas are things like steep slopes, wetlands, very sensitive areas for one reason or another, and they're defined in the zoning resolution. We essentially tell the developers, you can't do anything within 20 feet of those areas under the current zoning. Under the overlay, that number gets increased to 50 feet, so a 30-foot increase. Stormwater setbacks, no change there. They basically can't do anything within 20 feet of any of the stormwater basins they're proposing. Parking lot setbacks, you can see that's increasing. Right now, they could be up to 75 feet from the street right-of-way line. Now we're up to the 170. Lot sizes, in the existing PRD, if you're not utilizing conservation development standards, your minimum lot size is either 10,000 square feet if it's a fee simple lot, or if you're doing like a condo style development where there are actual lots, we call them building envelopes. Essentially the area where the condo could be built has to be no smaller than 60 by 120. We're not proposing to change any of that. If you're developing with conservation development standards, one of the benefits of doing that is there's no minimum lot size requirement. On fee simple lots, the building envelope restriction though remains. Again, right now as currently drafted, the overlay does not propose changing any of that. Again, no changes here in regards to any of the PRD lot setbacks. I won't go through all of those in depth. You can see there that we have setbacks. They vary depending on whether you're using conservation development standards, not conservation development standards, and even somewhat varies by the type of use. But we're not proposing to change any of that. And those, to be clear, those are the setbacks on the individual lots. How far does the home on that lot being built within that plan on its specific lot have to be from its front, side, and rear lot lines? No different than you have setback requirements in the rural residential of how far you can build a home or close you can build a home to your front, side, and rear lot lines. Again, no changes in regards to the lot setbacks. This is just a continuation of that slide. And then we get into the commercial stuff. I'm not going to get into this too much because like I've sort of already said, there's really no plans to expand the commercial zoning in this area. But if it were to ever happen, you can see we're putting more controls in place. No more than 50% of a tract containing a non-residential any non-residential use in a non-residential zoning district. No more than 50% of that tract could be essentially developed with building or impervious surface. Under the current zoning, under the proposed, or 75% under the current zoning, I'm sorry. Under the proposed, that gets lowered down to 50%. There's a maximum size of what we call commonly controlled business operations, which is essentially when you add up all the square footage of the buildings together for those non-residential uses. Under the current code for that development, they can't exceed 65,000 square feet. You can see we're drastically reducing that down to 20,000 square feet. And I can tell you, if you want to know sort of what does a 20,000 square foot building look like, Red Bank Harbor is a good example. I think that's probably pretty close to being 20,000 square feet. So if you're not familiar with the development names, Red Bank Harbor is where Antonio's Pizza and the barber shop and the little convenience store are located, right at Maxtown and Sunbury. And then you can see PCF has always sort of been an outlier in regards to there was no specified lot coverage restriction. It would now have the 50% applied in the overlay. And the building coverage has always been unique. It's lot size times 7,500 square feet for whatever reason, I'm not sure. It too would be beholden to that 20,000 square foot max if this were to be adopted. So I promise you we're nearing the end. These last few slides are just clearing up misconceptions. I've reviewed a lot of I've sat in a lot of these meetings, heard a lot of comments, and I've reviewed a lot of the emails, if not all of the emails we've gotten sent to us these past several months. A lot of good feedback in them. Always happy to get the pulse of the community on these issues. That said, I have seen and read some things that it was clear there was maybe not a 100% clear understanding of what this was doing or of zoning, which is frankly completely understandable because most people don't think about zoning, don't care about zoning, don't read about zoning unless it actually is impacting them. So I know a lot of people who come to these meetings are learning about it for the first time, so that's why I'm very used to having these conversations and more than happy to clear up a lot of these misconceptions because I think it makes for a better, productive conversation. Number one, the proposed amendment adds a second zoning designation to affected properties. It does not change the base zoning designation. So if you're currently zoned rural residential, that is not changing. If you're currently zoned planned residential, that is not changing. Essentially, what you have now is a second zoning classification sitting on your property, but your base classification is going to still remain. Second point, adoption of this amendment, if it were to happen, is subject to the state's referendum rule. So any legislative zoning act the township approves, within 30 days, the citizenry has a right to file a referendum petition, which means nothing we do or adopt can go into effect for at least 30 days. This overlay, if it was adopted, could be changed in the future. Minor changes, major changes, or it could be completely rescinded. It would go back through this exact same process we're going through now. The zoning text and map amendment process, those actions being legislative, again, would be subject to referendum. I want to clear up, this overlay was not requested by any developers. In fact, I think if developers were here and making public comment, I think they would probably tell you they would not like this. Because it's less density and more open space or more buffers, it makes it tougher for them to develop. Density and design concepts were based on precedents established by existing approved developments. I can tell you some of the inspiration I had when putting this together was I looked at plans like Genoa Farms and Covington Meadows with really large swaths of open space perimeters around them. I thought those looked nice and fit the character of what we're looking for here. I wanted to try to find a way to codify that more in the code. And with the densities, I was looking at existing patterns that already exist north of Big Walnut Road. Just to clear up, the city of Columbus had no involvement with the creation of this overlay. They didn't ask for it. They didn't tell me to do it. We did provide them a copy to review and had a virtual meeting with them where they asked several questions, and I have not heard from them since on any of this. Speaking of the city of Columbus, I know they have a lot of rules and regulations pertaining to Hoover itself, as well as they get very particular about that property line that we were just talking about and what happens near their property. This overlay will coexist with any of the regulations Columbus has, but it doesn't alter them, nor does it supersede them. They essentially live in two different silos. Zoning doesn't affect Columbus's rules, and Columbus doesn't enforce zoning rules. They are essentially two different things. Just like your HOA and zoning. Zoning doesn't have anything to do with your HOA, and your HOA doesn't really have anything to do with zoning. They are two different sets of rules that you have to abide by. The overlay does not function as a property maintenance code. I know early in these discussions, there was a lot of concern that we were going to get, and that speaks to this bottom bullet point, that we were going to now get involved with telling you how you had to mow your yard and landscape and generally maintain your property. No, trust me, I have no interest in getting involved with that whatsoever. That said, the state we have existing zoning rules in place for things like junk vehicles, and the state has existing regulations regarding public nuisances on file that the board can enforce if they believe something's a public nuisance. Those laws still exist and apply, but this overlay is not getting in the business of telling you how to maintain the grass or trees or flowers on your property. Properties seeking to rezone their base zoning district designation, an example would be going from rural residential to planned residential, will still have to go through the township's two-step process. Step one in that process is submitting a rezoning request and a preliminary development plan. That goes to the zoning commission for review and recommendation, and then to the trustees for final vote. Per state law, that action would be subject to referendum. Assuming the rezoning and preliminary development plan were approved and survived the referendum period, they would eventually have to come back and apply for final development plan application. That plan goes to the zoning commission for recommendation and review and recommendation, and then subsequently goes to the board for final vote and approval. That act is an administrative act. Administrative acts by law are not subject to referendum. So there's no worries. We are not cutting out the zoning commission out of the rezoning process. We're not cutting out the trustees from the rezoning process or the development plan process. All of those processes of developing property in that manner will not be changed by this. The overlay does not supersede development plans approved prior to its creation. So when a development plan is approved, they codify certain design rules and regulations specific to that neighborhood. There's a development plan for Medallion. There's estates. There's a development plan for Vinmar Farms. They're different from one another. Each development plan differs, some to minor degrees, some to very large degrees, from one another. All of those that were approved prior to this overlay are going to continue to be valid and are not affected by this because they are already done. They're approved. I can't go back and change them.
Question?
I know I'm probably asking a really dumb question, but who decides what the net developable acre is? Who decides that?
It's a policy decision that the board adopts as part of the zoning resolution.
But it's based on?
What's that?
Are you talking about each individual, if a developer comes in, who says what the net developable acre is?
Well, are there things that would prevent an acre from being fully developed?
Yes.
Yes. The zoning code has a full definition of what we consider that to be.
Okay.
And that's a policy established.
Does that have anything to do with like wetlands or anything like that? So,
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want me to bring the microphone over to you,
Yeah.
Mr. Anderson?
Name and address, please.
Okay, don't start talking zoning codes and division and all that.
Address first.
Oh, yeah, William R. Anders, 3501 Sunbury Road, Galena, Ohio. Been there 33 years. Prior to that, I was in there 10 years back over here on 2 acres, just next to the old township hall, just north. So I've seen all the stuff you talk about. I've been a member of different commissions and stuff that studied a lot of this stuff, and so it still goes on. Now, you brought up here, but after the last zoning meeting, the guys are up there talking, and they're talking about a lot of this might be moot because Galena is going to bring a sewer all the way down, like I live 2 miles from Galena, so that's at least 2 hours to get, 2 miles to get to me, how Galena is going to bring a sewer down into this whole area and do all that. Then also comes up the annexation issue. In other words, all that land that is Genoa Township is going to be the village of Galena. And I don't think all this stuff here, it does not really relate to the stuff that really meets people's anger or expectations. We could have, right across the street from me, I could have the village of Galena in my front yard. So let's just talk about that. It's going to totally change if a sewer comes through there. So talk about village of Galena, talk about their sewer. How is their sewer going to get down to be in front of me when you have things like Sage Creek and other developments that go from Sunbury Road all the way back to Trenton Road? So how would the Galena sewer get down to me? And especially, I'm pretty far away, considering the fact if you're gonna send a sewer all the way down the street to get all this land across the street from me that you're discussing. I got a question. You say developers aren't involved. That's not true. Nobody would start planning to put a sewer down 2 or 3 miles. I don't know why Galena might want to do it except for some other reasons. But you're going to bring a sewer down 2, 3, 4 miles down in Genoa property, annex the property. I'm just saying as a citizen, virtually until I heard the zoning board talking about it after their meeting, I didn't know anything about a Galena sewer coming down all that great distance. I mean, all this stuff we're talking about wouldn't be done unless they know there's a developer involved and there is going to be some type of land being developed. And by the way, anything that we put down now doesn't matter because the developer asked for variances and everything else, and we're giving them less density to begin with, which I'd be against. And then after doing that, the developer is going to find a way to ask for even more and more and more. So comment on the Galena sewer, how the heck the Galena sewer gets down into this whole area. And developers are there. Nobody's talking about bringing a sewer all the way down there unless they know there's going to be developers there and on that land. That's absurd to say. It's a nice secret.
Thanks, Bill.
So I guess to the first point, I guess I want to clarify. Genoa Township has no involvement or control over what Galena does with its sewer lines. That's a village decision. The village had to replace their plant a few years ago, partially because I think the old plant was beyond its useful life. And was probably not going to accommodate the growth that they are planning for in the future. So that said, the township, no involvement with that. Galena, those are Galena plans. If you want to know about Galena sewer plans, you're going to need to talk to the village. I can tell you, if you pull up the Galena comp plan, this 300 approximate acres is planned for in their plan. How do they get there? It's a good question.
Joe, is that Genoa Township?
Yeah, this is Genoa Township, right here.
Oh, so
This
just
is the
south of
northeast
Sage
quadrant,
Creek.
just south of Sage Creek.
Got it.
Correct. What
about that area? I couldn't understand what you were saying.
So there's
South of Sage Creek.
there's 300 plus acres of land here that is pretty much undeveloped. That if sewer were there and I was a developer, it's going to be right. As soon as sewer gets there, and it's not like owned by like I'm not even aware if there's even a house. There might be a little house here on a separate lot,
But I think the question was, how does
How do they get
Galena
there?
sewer? Okay.
I don't know exactly where the line would. I'm not aware of any specific plans of Galena to build anything out here. I just know development patterns and how things tend to grow over time. There's development activity happening in Galena out here off of Vans Valley Road. There's a huge development approved out there that I don't even think has broken ground, but it's going to happen. And it's like, I can't remember how many units, but it's a lot. Eventually, there's a lot of large tracts here, here, and here. If they sell and they want to a developer, and the developer talks to Galena and makes a deal and can work out a way to get sewer here, incrementally, that development can start working its way down this way, and back door its way into Genoa Township. I mean, look, that's
So
a
for
pretty
the-
substantial sized acreage right there.
So for people who will listen to this later, you're talking about going from the village of Galena through Berkshire, or
Through
Berkshire
Trenton.
Township,
Or yeah,
right.
Berkshire, yep, correct.
and then eventually connecting to Harlem, and then it will come from the east.
Yes, they could. Now, again,
Yeah, you're
that
not
is
saying they are.
100% speculation.
Yes.
I don't want, there's nothing formally on the books that I'm aware of that happened. But as a planner, it's my job to speculate and look at things and try to predict what is likely going to happen. If you go back and look at aerial imagery of the greater Columbus region online, you can pull it, there are sites that have historical aerial imagery, and I can look at what Genoa Township looked like in 1955. I can find aerials of it. Greater Columbus went to like Agler Road. And then you go to the 60s, and it's a little farther north. Then you go to the 70s, and it's a little farther north. And even in the 80s, you're up into South Westerville. And then in the 90s, Genoa Township starts developing, south of Maxtown. Now we are in the 2000s and 2020s. Now we're up this way. And Galena is growing, and Sunbury is growing. The development patterns, you can just say, it's a wave. It's moving northward. And it's moving outward as Galena and that growth gets up into Galena and Sunbury, and those areas expand. So it's not a question of whether I want it to happen. It's just that's the natural patterns of development. And if you look at the history of Columbus, especially on the northern end of Columbus, because if you go on Google Earth, you go from the city proper, the northern end has developed way more than the southern end. That's just the pattern. So what I'm just trying to do when I was trying to put this together was look at those patterns, see where I think they might be going next in trying to plan for them. Am I going to be 100% right? No. No planner ever is. You can't, you just don't know. A couple years ago, we had no idea Intel was going to be plopping down a huge chip plant a few miles from our doorstep. There's just things you can't anticipate. You just do your best, which is why they always recommend every 5 years you update your comprehensive plan because things change. So I hope that
Yeah,
generally got
good.
to that, answer that question.
I'm pretty sure what I'm saying here. The Galena sewer plant was expanded because all those Homewood homes that were planned right off the Vans Valley Road up there north of the map a little bit were going to be almost like put in immediately. And they were surveying and they had equipment in there and all this stuff was going on. And Vans Valley Road was going to become a Homewood development. And they had an agreement, this is just from newspapers and everything else, there was an agreement that once they surveyed out the road and they surveyed out some of the plots in the Homewood area, then the developer would have to immediately pay Galena the sewer assessment for what was going to go in there. The home wasn't built yet or anything, but as soon as the survey was done and they started putting any kind of road in, the developer owed the Galena a lot of money. And that's what Galena was expecting for their sewer plant. Now, the problem is, for whatever reason, COVID or whatever, many reasons, that Homewood development didn't begin. Galena expected income from the Homewood development. That didn't come in. And so if I'm Galena, I'm looking around and I'm saying, let's see where else I can go to get income. And then that means they're going to go out through Berkshire, through Harlem, cut back down to the reservoir area in that 300 acres, which is right across the street from me. Go down to that 300 acres. I don't think anything's going to happen on the other side of the reservoir because there's already homes there. Mine, for example, goes from Sunbury Road all the way back to Hoover Reservoir property. So they're stopped. They can't go through my property unless they do some kind of fantastic eminent domain thing that Westerville did back in the Yarnell property and took away Genoa Township property. But so what you find is, I really think this, you're looking for income, if you're the village of Galena, an annexation of Genoa property and trying to get, I'm not sure how I heard anything about the Homewood recently. Because trying to get around, do a big loop, a big end around, you aren't going to go through Sage Creek, they'll kill you. And so they're trying to do an end run around, and frankly, if you put something together like this, I'd sure make it a lot better resolution, and I'd make the lot sizes a lot larger, and not try to make this thing look like let's say, a Pulte development between Sunbury and Galena, you know. And the developer, that's what, it's gonna look bad. Maybe have a big buffer, but we gotta ask for more. We're giving it away. I'll get the statements later on, but we're getting away of trying to preserve our rural development, our rural environment by allowing for little big homes on little footprints. And, why are we not asking for more in our plan, you know? Who else is gonna be here to offer a better or worse plan but Genoa Township? So why give this plan? Why are you giving away all that property in Genoa if they get there with the sewer and if they annex Genoa Township land, and I know all the tricks, why are you giving it away? Giving it away for small parcels of property. It seems like it's the opposite. One of your challenges you mentioned at first, there were 3 of them, and one of the challenges was to keep the rural environment and do all this. And then you're slapping down developments. You know, why are we asking for so little?
Thanks,
That's it.
Bill.
Would you like me to speak
Yeah,
to some of
you
that? So, I guess the overlay, I think it's pretty clear. We're not giving property away, obviously, with this overlay. So, with annexation, the township has very little, if almost any power to stop an annexation. It's just one of the joys of being a township in the state of Ohio is you don't have home rule authority. It can be very difficult to stop. And it's basically something that goes in front of the county commissioners, and to be candid, the county commissioners love townships, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, from a tax revenue standpoint, whether that property is in Galena or Genoa doesn't make, frankly, a huge difference. And the county commissioners' hands are similarly tied by the law a lot of times. So sometimes they don't really have much they can say to stop an annexation petition, unless it didn't comply with the state law somehow. So annexation can be very difficult for a township to stop. That's how we lost all that stuff to Westerville. Frankly, the best ways to stop annexation are to make yourself competitive in the market, essentially. What does that mean? That means if you're a developer and you have a choice of whether or not you're going to develop your property stay in Genoa or annex into Galena and develop, one of the things that you're going to look at is how difficult is it to develop, how expensive is it going to be to develop, and how many homes are they going to let me have? If we allow larger lots and less density, we are putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage against someone like the Village of Galena, who has sewer and might allow a higher density there. Now, to some degree, the competition is going to be unbalanced, because if Galena's providing the sewer and says, if we provide you sewer, one of the contingencies is you have to join the Village of Galena, then competition really doesn't matter at that point, because we can't compete against that. We don't have sewer. We don't have our own sewer plant. And this side of the east side of the water is either going to be sewer will eventually probably be serviced either by Galena in the northern ends or Columbus on the southern ends. And the Columbus deal is something that I think got put in place decades ago when Polaris got put together. There was a lot of, Columbus was annexing up into Delaware County and was going to get all that tax revenue and whatnot. And I don't know the particulars, but I think there was some sort of agreement, well, Delaware County will service the Polaris area and get the tap fees and stuff from that, even though Columbus gets to annex all the land. But in exchange, Columbus will let you service this area on the east side of Big Walnut Creek and come up north from Morse Road. So I think that's the origin of a lot of those sewer agreements. I'm sure people who have been here longer and were here during all that probably can speak much more intelligently to it than I can, but that's my general understanding of it. So annexation is tough. So we have to find a balance of, given where we can compete, how do we put ourselves in a place where we're not creating regulations that people are going to look at and be like, 5-acre lots in Genoa, or I can do 100 homes in Galena? That's an easy decision. I'm going to make more money with 100 homes if I'm a developer. I'm just going to go there. The closer we can close that gap, the more difficult we're going to make that decision. I can tell you one of the things when I was looking back at the records was when Harvest Wind and all that area got done north of Maxtown Road. The developer had the opportunity or option to just annex all that into Westerville. I think they wanted to keep in Genoa, though, because They were able to get close to the density they wanted if the township was willing to cooperate with them. And they, frankly, they could sell a neighborhood to residents, and one of the selling points probably was, you are not in the city of Westerville, you essentially get a 2.5% pay increase because you don't have to pay city income tax. And, you know, I'm sure there's pros and cons for every community. I'm sure there was pros and cons for whether to go with Westerville or go with Genoa. They ultimately, and thankfully, decided to remain in Genoa. So those are the factors. If large lots, I totally get the desire for, but when it comes to annexation, large lots is not a good defense. Because if the developer's saying, well, you're only allowing me a low number of houses out here, where if I go over to Galena, I can do a high number of houses, it's gonna make their decision easier. But again, to some degree, it becomes a moot point, because if the village provides sewer and says, well, if you're gonna be on our sewer, you're gonna be part of the village, regardless of whether you wanna stay in Genoa or not, the developer's gonna really have a decision. If they wanna sewer and do their development, they're gonna have to join Galena. So that protection of increasing the density, not increasing density, but of staying competitive in that market is only gonna take you so far. I'm not gonna say it's the absolute solution to this.
So you keep getting interrupted, but I'll let you finish your presentation.
I think I was on the last slide,
Okay.
believe it or not. But these have been good questions and conversations I hope will
I'd
help.
rather do it
be
during,
informative.
because otherwise I feel like we're fumbling through the slides, although we're fumbling now. But
Well, and it can help, because I'm sure some of the public feedback was gonna be questions about this stuff,
Yes.
and maybe hopefully this clarified some of those issues. I was on the last slide.
Okay.
So the overlay was reviewed by legal counsel, the legal counsel being Delaware County Prosecutor's Office. They did provide a handful of comment, or probably 3 or 4 edits. And those edits were reviewed by the zoning commission and incorporated into the draft that they've recommended to the trustees. Just moving forward, if the amendment is not adopted, the maximum permitted PRD density for the entirety of the township remains that 1.8/2.2 number that we've spoke of. Obviously, that number could only happen if the board was willing to rezone a property to PRD, though. And then there would be no maximum density restriction for the Planned Community Facilities District, but just like PRD, aside from areas where that district already exists, someone would have to come in and ask for rezoning to that. So the township would still have some control over where some of that development and density happened by reviewing the rezoning request. So my intention here this whole evening as I wrap up was really just to present the facts of why we're looking at this, what the concept originally was, how we got here, what the proposal is, why we're looking at doing this, and why some of the things I drafted are the way they are. I'm not going to sit here and, I think tell the board or the public how to feel or what to do, or because I know there's a lot of concerns out there, and even the board, we've had some discussions at one of the other board meetings about looking at a possible alternative or alternatives to make sure there isn't a better route out there. So I just want to go on record that I was asked to draft this document, to put this concept together. I put together something that I felt was doable, workable, and defensible. But that said, I'm just one person. I don't know everything. That's why we have boards and public comment periods and all of these processes, because it's a collaborative community effort. If this is something the board or community just isn't interested in and doesn't want, the board is completely within its power to make that decision and go a different direction. And yeah, it'll be what it'll be, and maybe we'll try to do something else. So, and I think even originally when Trustees Vaughn and Goodman, please correct me if I'm wrong, when the board initiated this document, it was really so we could go through this process.
Yes.
I don't think a vote to initiate the document was the board saying, we absolutely, if the zoning, we are going to fully intend to adopt this. It was the only way the board could, I don't want to use the word force, but
Consider.
mandate the zoning commission to review the document. Because if the board would have just asked the zoning commission politely, the zoning commission technically could have said, thank you for your request, we'll get back to you, and then never do anything with it. This was the only way for the board to have the zoning commission formally undertake that process. Now, would the zoning commission have thumbed their noses at the board? No, I don't think so. But the board was just privy to information regarding where the township was in regards to things wrapping up with the legal case, which is now closed, that the zoning commission just wasn't. So the board was more apprised of information, which is why the board started this ball instead of the zoning commission. But again, I know I'm sort of droning on here. I just want to make it clear that this was never a predetermined conclusion, and I wasn't ever trying to force an agenda, anyone's particular agenda. I was just asked to do this, and the board wanted the zoning commission to look at it, provide a recommendation, and have the opportunity to get public comment to determine whether or not it's something that's right for this community. So I think with that, I'm finally going to
Very good.
take a breath and let someone else talk for a while.
Thank you for answering the questions so far, Joe, and thank you for the presentation. It's good. At this time, we'll move to public comment. So I know some people have already spoken. I'm not going to hold you to 3 minutes, but I do ask that you try to make your point as brief as you can, because, you know, we're already an hour and a half into this meeting. I don't want to squelch anybody's freedom of speech, but do please be considerate of everyone's time and try not to ramble. But at that, I'll open it up. Go ahead. And everyone, as you present yourself, could you please state your name and your address for the record?
My name is John McHale. I live at 5342 Teresa's Trail in Galena. And I came to the zoning meeting that happened a while ago, and basically I wasn't speaking against the watershed. I was speaking from a point of confusion. My wife and I are very involved in the township. People come to us and say, what do you know about this? What do you know about that? And I had people asking me about the watershed, so I went and looked at it, and I said to the zoning board, it was kind of like, you know, when you get an app update and you look at it and say, no, what, accept, whatever. It was just too much. After like 2 paragraphs, I'm done. So, but then I had people, a golfing buddy called me and said, do you know that if this goes through, they're going to be controlling your trees and the shrubs? And then somebody else said they're going to be controlling the fertilizer on your yard. Somebody else said they're going to be increasing density. And it went on and on and on. And I decided I need to get into this. So I went back and looked at it. And I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I'm not the dumbest. And it's difficult. It's hard reading. So I thought I need to go and sit down with Joe. He was very kind with his time. He answered my questions. He explained it to me. And I wanted to come back tonight to the trustees and say, after going through all this process, I think this is a remarkable suggestion. I think it's very proactive. I think it's something that's creative. I think it's something that the township residents don't understand by the comments that I got. They're just totally confused. There was a couple here that meeting that night that were saying this is clearly increasing the density because people don't know how to calculate density. And it's not their fault. That's not what they do. That's not their thing. So I just have been explaining to my friends and neighbors and so forth. There's a property near us that's 25 acres. When we built our house in 2019, it was required for septic to have 2 acres. So in that example, I said, well, if they were to develop that 25-acre plot now, and whatever it would come down to, the 85, I didn't even get into that. I just said if it was 25, they could basically put 12 houses there. 2 acres, you know, is the maximum that they could use. Without that, if the sewer were to come, which eventually the sewer will get here one way or the other, it might not be in our lifetime, but it'll be here, you know, sometime, maybe in 5 years, who knows. But when it gets here, they could put on that same 25-acre plot of land, they could put 55 houses. So going from 12 to 55 is like, whoa. But what Joe has done with this proposal is as much as I think he possibly can do legally and ethically and morally, is it gets it down to like 41 houses, which is a tremendous saving. It's a 25% reduction in the houses that could potentially go without this proposed action. So I am fully in favor of this. I would say with, well, I can tell you honestly, with 100% certainty, the people that I spoke to, when I went back and talked to them about it and explained that they were wrong and this is why they were wrong, 100% of them were now in favor of it. So the opposition that you're hearing, I think, is 100% confusion, not 100% people being opposed to this plan whatsoever. So I just wanted to say I commend you, Joe. Thank you for doing this. It's very creative, and I'm fully on board with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Suebury, 6900 Sunbury Road. I just wanted to say, we've attended a couple of these meetings, and to the point of the last gentleman, it was very confusing. The documentation online was very confusing. Even sitting in the meetings was very confusing. But Joe, I have to commend you on your presentation tonight. And I think, hopefully you're going to share that, because I think that if we would have had that sooner, you probably wouldn't have had so much opposition. And it does, up until this point, it always seemed like it was a very negative thing. And after seeing the presentation tonight, I think it as a positive move. So thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, Caroline Ramsey, 8920 Cupstone Drive. Yeah, I would echo the last two speakers, because one misconception that I heard, which is why I asked the questions earlier about the calculations and stuff, because people that don't do this all the time were not familiar with that. Because one misconception that I heard said it locked in density of 1.6 houses per acre when it used to be 0.75. And I didn't see any of those figures in your presentation. So, but I do agree, like maybe your first misconception that you want to clear up is, does it increase or decrease the density? Because that's what everybody, I think, that's their first point. So that might be something, if you want to put that on your slide and explain it like you did after I asked the question. So I appreciate Trustee Goodman saying in the beginning, just wanting to advocate for more time and public input, because it is confusing for people to understand. I was just curious if Columbus will weigh in at all. Like, I know they haven't voiced a stance on it, but do they ever take a position? You think they might like it, but maybe they want to stay neutral on some of these things? And
Go ahead. I think she's asking
Let me
you.
answer.
You would know, I haven't been in
Yeah,
contact
it
with
sounds
them. You
like
know more
you
than I
just
do.
haven't
They're
commented.
not obligated to.
Yeah.
At this juncture, I'd be surprised if they did, because we've been dealing with this since August, and I'm pretty sure I sent it to them in late summer or early fall last year, and we've never heard anything since our virtual meeting with them. Columbus is probably going to be for anything that's fewer septic systems around Hoover, would be my guess, because it's less risk of
Right.
septic systems that can leak into the.
Yeah, that's why I just wondered if they plan to take a stance on it.
Generally, other than that, I don't want to speak for them, but I just don't know what their reason for otherwise getting involved really would be.
Yeah, I guess it's probably, if they were concerned about it, they probably would have acted
I
or
would-
expressed something.
Think so.
And then my last question is not necessarily about the zoning and the density, but I just noticed as I was trying to also look through the documents that you have online, is there a backstory or explanation as to why the definition of drive-through is now added into your, I know it's a different topic, but it relates to the.
It is.
so.
And there's a lot of edits. We add,
There is a
drive-through,
reason
delete.
for it,
All right,
Yes.
well, I'll sit down and maybe you could clarify.
I'll let you zoning people explain that.
Goodman, you want to take it or you want me to?
It doesn't matter. I asked about it, and specifically because drive-through to me means I'm going to drive through the bank and use the pneumatic tube, or I'm going to Wendy's and they're handing me my order, and I've never gotten out of my car, but there's a specific window to do this. Where I was concerned is that if we don't want drive-through, are we okay with curbside pickup? They're two very different things in my mind. And so that's why the definition for drive-through was added, because especially with the pandemic having been so rampant, there were so many more places where you could do a curbside pickup. You didn't go in, but didn't go through the drive-through. And so that's the reason. And you can, yeah.
Correct. So any of the commercial uses that would be permitted, should we ever do a commercial rezoning, it says like, you can have a restaurant, but you can't have a drive. In zoning land, you have to define terms that otherwise would seem obscenely obvious to the regular person, because you're talking about the law and what is a drive-through? What do you consider a drive-through?
And
You
they're
have to
noisy.
have, yes. You have to
Yeah.
have the rule, the definition in place so you know what it is and isn't.
Yeah, because it's very different to go through with the speaker, of I need this, what do you want, do you really want, your order is this much, versus, here's your bag, please sign this, so.
So it's just to clarify.
Absolutely.
Yeah, curbside and not, it's not
Mhm.
like expanding it or writing that in.
Yep.
Anyone else?
Just one final point, my initial confusion or concern, the city of Columbus is currently instituting and enforcing that land stewardship agreement for the property adjacent to the water, which is very restrictive on how you can maintain your property. And I initially had concerns that this was somehow backdooring that process, and through the presentation today, it completely clarified everything for me, and it was well done, Joe.
Perfect, thank you. Anyone else? All right, what do you got? Real quick, real quick.
Come on, Bill.
Make it quick.
Long was Joe's presentation. It wasn't our individual residents' questions.
It's not that you're
The
long-winded.
last time we were here at the zoning meeting, and they're going through all this, a lot of the residents asked really good questions. I thought I asked some really good questions. How many of us got answers from the questions? None. They just went through the questions, ignored what everybody, this place was all full, and they ignored all the residents' questions, and they went to a vote and they passed it. There was no discussion among themselves about the residents' questions. Wasn't any discussion among themselves about aspects of the code. It was like, this is what we're gonna do. We've already discussed it outside of the meeting, I don't know. But it was like, wham, no discussions. It reminded me of going back when you have no discussions and Connie and Carl would vote yes, and everybody'd say, what happened to all our questions? So I'm against this code exact as it's written. I think it's not written well. I think it's a developer's attorney's paradise to take advantage of this thing. And it's not gonna happen tomorrow or the next day or in the next month or year. Who's gonna pay for that sewer to come all the way around this big loop or whatever they can do to get back down into Genoa Township? It's gonna be a developer. It's not gonna be the village of Galena. It's gonna be developers that do all this. So I don't see any big rush it's not gonna be done overnight. There's no big rush. You have to pass this thing immediately. And I still think you can get a lot more out of that land than just squashing all these houses together. Let's see, what else? I'm trying to skip most of my comments because they've been mentioned. Oh, I'm sorry, Bill Anders, William R. Anders, 3501 Sunbury Road, Galena, mailing, not in Galena. Okay, and I've been in the current house for 33 years, and across the reservoir, actually, I was up back in the reservoir there for 10 years.
And your other couple points were?
Yeah, the points are, no big rush. Get some other attorney's opinion on this. I think you don't need to rush into this thing. I mean, questioning if the sunshine laws were followed, but I don't see what the rush is to pass a new code. And if the citizens been left out of it, how many citizens really know about this, and they know about what might be done with the land all the way down the other side of, say, Sunbury Road or Bread Bank Road? How many really know about this?
Well,
I
we've
didn't
done our
until 2 or 3 weeks ago.
in my opinion, we have done everything we can do to educate the public. It was in the newsletter at least once. I wrote an article in it in March. We put public notices out. Was it in the paper, Joe?
The Gazette?
Gazette, online, Facebook, it's on our website. We sent out an email. We have done everything that we can do to notify the people. So I don't know what else we could do to notify the people. I feel like the representation here tonight is pretty good, considering that you had quite a few people show up at previous zoning meetings.
Most of them left before this thing even got started because they put other zoning issues ahead of it.
I would just recommend for the future,
If you want to come,
and I know we talked about this.
if you could talk in the mic.
Here you go. It's your turn.
I mean, I did see all the online notices, but a lot of people we live right on Sunbury Road, and a lot of our neighbors didn't. And, I brought it up a couple of months ago that you have a lot of people that, elderly people who have been there forever, who don't, subscribe to social media, who don't read emails. I know it was in the bulletin, that could be missed, right? But I think the one other thing that it could have been done was or physical mail. And I know, Joe, you hit on that when we talked about it the last time, it wasn't approved. But I think going forward, you guys should reevaluate that because of the type of people the type of residents that you have here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Margaret Bonello, 7346 Marcy Loop. As far as informing the public, I do know that a lot of times things are done that aren't in the newsletter, so maybe the newsletter should be a little larger. But for this specific event, if you're trying to contact people and you feel like the word isn't getting out, perhaps when Genoa Township does a public event, the Easter egg hunt. Perhaps someone could, I don't know, have a table, have some pictures. Do you have residents have questions? There's going to be a lot of eyeballs at that Easter egg hunt. It's just a suggestion. Maybe another way to reach out to the public and say, hey, we're making changes here. If you care about it, here's some information. If you do care about it, let us know what you think. But I do agree, what's the rush? We've done a lot of things in the last few years in this township that seem to be steamrolled through, and we don't need to do that, unless I'm missing something. Is there some deadline that has to be done by a certain time? Maybe I'm just ill-informed and I'm not aware of it. But I think that we need to tread carefully, because some of the changes we've made lately, I don't agree with. I say lately, I mean the last several years, not yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Going once, all right. All right, we will close public comment then at this time, and we'll switch to trustee comments. Anyone?
I'll start, Joe. The presentation was very helpful. I'm impressed, and I know it had to take a lot of work, but I think that is one of the issues I expressed when I was on the zoning commission is communicating this to the residents. And I think just throwing this code out, I mean, I do this for a living, and it was hard for me to read. So to just throw this out and say, this is what we're doing, it's great, you're gonna love it, was one of my biggest challenges on the zoning commission. And I think providing that presentation and maybe even paring it down a little more would be extremely helpful to quell a lot of the comments we're getting that they don't understand what we're doing.
I agree. This was a learning experience for me, and in retrospect, I wish I would have done that at the very beginning.
Better late than never, is what I say.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, it was helpful for me.
yeah, me too.
Good, I'm glad.
Nothing else?
I agree. I think the presentation was very helpful. I think that there's some misperceptions. There was a question about comments, and granted, it's not 8,000 households in this stack, but there's a significant amount of comments that we did receive. I think we probably each received some via telephone and, neighbors asking, that kind of thing. The overall goal of this was to reduce the density within definable boundaries. And those definable boundaries also make this legally defensible. And that was what our Delaware County Prosecutor's Office helped us to determine is this legally defensible if someone brings forth any questions, lawsuits, et cetera. And that's one of the things that we have to watch. In addition to lowering density, we want to protect the Hoover Reservoir. We want to protect the nature that's around there, the flora and the fauna and all that. One of the questions in this stack of comments was, why are you only doing Hoover? Why aren't you doing Alum also? And, that is a legitimate question. We started somewhere. You've got to start somewhere, not to say that at some point it might not change and go it be broadened if this were to be passed. So those are kind of the concepts of this whole thing. And I think that what I've read in a number of the comments are, I don't want this plan because it raises density. Well, as we can see from what Joe showed us, it does not raise density. And so our challenge now is to help people understand that this is, it has good reasons behind it. Let me put it that way. The good reasons being to protect the Hoover areas and also to lower densities. And Joe, I love the slides about my little lot, you're not gonna tell me I can't mow my grass anymore, and my lawn care guy is gonna love you, because otherwise he'd be unemployed. So those are some of the concerns that were expressed. I think those have been clarified. I think, from my perspective, it's a good thing for the township. There's not a rush, but the longer we wait, the more developers are going to come into this township with our existing densities. Once they submit their application, they're locked in. And then we can't tell them, oh, by the way, we're gonna change this. So sooner rather than later will prevent higher densities. My 2 cents.
Yeah, thank you. I have a few comments. One thing I'd like to see in this plan, we talk about, I like the added buffers and the more restrictive landscape requirements, but I feel like if the whole purpose of this overlay is to preserve the natural character, I would like to see some more natural preserves, like our wildflower. I like what they did at Vinmar Reserve, where they are not, the whole front of that property, they're leaving natural. I thought that was the point, was to preserve the land. So I'd like to see maybe some requirements of, to me, there's no difference in green space in a neighborhood, whether it's owned by HOA or if it's a person's yard. You're treating it. And I think the whole purpose of this is to protect the water. The water is contaminated by fertilizers. We know all this. So I feel like if we had more restrictive, again, preservation, the whole point of this was to preserve the natural character. So I'd like to see some of that, rather than you have to plant more trees and build more mounds. And I don't know how we do it. I'm throwing the idea out there. I did listen to all of the zoning commission audio on all of these meetings. I was disappointed that there was no real edit to the actual plan. I think the zoning commission did a really good job of trying to get public comment, but I think they were only focused on public comment. And then based on public comment, I don't think any changes were made. So I think 1.65 is too high. And I think that's where the confusion comes, where residents are confused that, yes, you're lowering the density. No, you're really not, I'm sorry. The current land in this area, most of it is one house on 1 acre. So the only reason that we're doing this is because a developer will come in and increase the density. And right now, that density maximum is 2.2. I think 1.65 is too high, and I'm surprised that that was never mentioned, as far as I know, at a zoning commission meeting. So we had a referendum a couple years ago, and the density was 1.89. To me, 1.65 is not that much less. And 1.65 was based on one development in planning area 4, and it happens to be the highest development. I don't think you should base your density on the highest PRD neighborhood in this area. Also, Vinmar Farms, I don't think the density is 1.65. I think there was a lot of land swap, and I think you would have to reconfigure that. I don't really think, if you go back to when that land was rezoned, yes, that area right there might be 1.65, but when you take in all of the other land swapped and preservation areas, I think it's actually less. But I'll leave it to the experts to figure that out, because figuring out net density is not my specialty.
That was one of the really difficult things to figure out, is because prior boards would combine subdivisions. So Vinmar Farms, along with Walnut Grove
Yes.
Estates, ended up being approved at the same time with an offset gift of land for Fleur Road Park. Now, you try and tell me what the real density is anywhere in
That's what I
that,
said.
because it can't be figured out. I would differ with the statement you made about the lands in this watershed area being one house per acre. When I look at this, Vinmar Farms, yes, it's higher, but when you go down into part of the watershed that is in planning area 1,
Yeah, you're right.
those densities are 2.2 in some of those areas. So I can't agree with that
I
one.
get that, but I guess in my thinking of that, most of that land's already developed. So nobody's going to come in and rezone any of that. Most of it already is. So I think when I think, what is the vacant, what parcels of land are still left to develop in Genoa Township? It's in planning areas 2, 3, and 4. So that, I guess that's why I kind of take out planning area 1 when I'm figuring that out.
And the other thing is, when you look at the 1.65, you have to remember that that also is with conservation standards. So off the top of that, they're taking 50% for open space. So there's, if nothing else, it's visual that there's more open space there. I mean, there is, because the other one is 40%. You get 1.35 with 40%. So there's a big difference there.
Anything else? Trustee comments? Anybody have anything to add?
I'm going to hold, I need to absorb some information. I would just ask that we discuss an opportunity to get that presentation out before we make a decision. It would be helpful to see what perspective changes after that information gets disseminated to everyone as best we can, besides using a mailer. I think we've already decided that a mailer is not very cost effective, but I'd like to see that presented to the residents again.
Well, you can't present that presentation in a mailer
Yeah.
either.
Yeah, we'll obviously be able to post the slides to the website. We can also provide a link to the meeting and maybe even tell people, here's the time marks. Hope you have an hour and a half of your time available. Maybe you can listen to it while you wash dishes or something.
Or just read through the slides.
You're
Or just
washing
read through the
dishes for
slides.
an hour and a half. You got other issues
I have a toddler,
besides
so
density.
Yeah, May 1st, I think.
May.
I don't even think you need all that historical background stuff. I think those tables that outline that if you're in a suburban development or a rural development, no impact.
okay.
And that's what people want to know.
So do you
is-
want me to post a pared down version of it then?
I think the meat, I think the first couple slides of the history and that kind of stuff, you can probably take out.
Okay.
I don't know, if you
And
want to
just sort of
send
keep-
it, if you want to send it to us, do you mind each of
Yeah.
us giving
I'd be
him?
happy
like
to
to see
Yeah,
provide
yeah, if
feedback.
I
you
mean,
send
what
it to
slide you
us
think are
and we'll
important?
say,
Yeah.
we think this is important, you can combine it.
Yeah, in the meantime, if someone does want to see the full thing, they can always ask for
Yes.
a copy of it from me and I'll provide it because it's a public record.
Right.
Well, or put a link to the full presentation, or, you know.
Yeah,
the-
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna say Cliff's Notes.
Yeah.
Nobody's old enough to remember
Yes.
Cliff Notes but me.
Yes, we are.
But, you know, but, you know, I date myself all the time on that one. But put both of them out there and perhaps ask our Director of Communications to
Yes.
put a note on Facebook that we had a meeting, we think this might be very helpful, and she can put the link out there.
Certainly, and as the board alluded to, you're under no obligation to make any kind of decision tonight. So, I have a couple of the comments, I think in terms of potential revisions Trustee Vaughn threw out, I can start thinking about them. I'm even more than happy to meet with each one of you individually and maybe get some feedback on what you think you might like to see, and then maybe at the next meeting, we throw some ideas out there and look at the text and see what you may or may not want to do.
I would suggest too that since we have a trustee meeting in 2 weeks, that if we have comments, maybe we could just get a brief update,
Yeah, that'd be great.
not necessarily full discussion.
Yeah, just a mini, can we do do that?
You'll have to continue this hearing to that date and technically reopen the hearing for the purpose, just knowing that you're just gonna have those discussions. We can't discuss the contents of this document outside of a meeting that's not part of this
Can we,
public
And I
Can we-
take that back.
I was going to say, can we do it with the J.C. Manny then?
No,
But we
because
just-
we'll only have two of us.
Yeah,
But you can come in later. We could do that first.
Well, that's true.
If you wanna continue this hearing to that date and just do 2 items on
Do
that
it
meeting.
first and then you can leave.
Or we can make him just sit back there and wait,
Yeah, forever.
spend his whole night here.
Honestly, I don't like to bring applicants in there and make them sit.
So you would go second?
And I'm hoping that goes relatively smoothly because
Yeah.
it's not different than the preliminary development plan. So I wouldn't be opposed to stepping out. I think I did it at some of the zoning meetings anyway.
I was really just teasing.
I will.
Board's call. I
Yeah,
can make whatever
think
works.
I would like to do it at are you available that day?
What was it, third?
Second, I think.
Third,
May
Tuesday the 3rd.
Third.
Yeah.
Are you available on the 3rd?
Is that the Tuesday?
Yes. I know. Hey, blame Joe. Just kidding.
We can always reschedule that.
No, we're not. I'm just teasing. We'll make it quick, right? Our meeting starts at 6:30 and then you can go.
All right, I'm good with that, the Thursday.
Yeah. So we'll continue to the 3rd. Maria, do you have something real quick?
I just wanted to ask, will the comments that you have made as trustees be shared somehow?
They'll eventually be reflected in the minutes that are written for this meeting. But those don't happen.
Yeah, that'll be a couple months. Unless you want to go online and listen.
I would like to have what you said definitely put out there.
They,
I don't know how to make that happen.
minutes aren't approved. We probably won't approve these minutes, maybe if they're finished by, probably not, right? Our next meeting?
I probably will
On
be
the
like June.
21st? Oh, yeah.
It'll be a
Yeah, it
while.
takes a while because somebody has to go through and type all of the stuff, and especially with the public comments, they summarize, so it might be a little while. So if you wanted to take it upon yourself and listen to the meeting and take your own notes, that's the fastest way.
I mean, the
I
two,
understand that. It would
yeah,
just be, I'd like
yeah,
to think that
it's a little while.
the trustee opinions should be shared with,
They are,
okay.
Yeah.
Great,
yeah.
thank you.
yeah, because
Yep.
what I heard in terms of the 2 things you wanted to look at was the preservation issue of figuring out maybe is there a way we could do some of that better?
Yeah.
And then also the density issue. Those were the 2 things I heard sort of to
Yep.
focus on.
So will you be able to evaluate Penmar and what was the other one?
Walnut
Walnut
Grove.
Grove.
And try to give us some idea of what you think the density is?
I think what I've done is probably about as close as what I can do, because it's like Trustee Goodman said, you had 2 different developments, an off-site dedication, plus you have to throw in the fact that the density was calculated in a different way back then. So even the 1.65 number is like an adjusted estimation, because Vinmar Farms was approved when we did things using gross density methodology, not net density methodology.
And would it make it cleaner if we just made the entire township PRD fall under the same thing and not even have a Hoover overlay, just make the whole township?
It's an option. It
I mean,
just,
let's just put it this way, if this is for the true health, safety, and welfare of the township and the reservoir, it's that there's a concern about polluting the reservoir, then shouldn't the same thing apply to the rest of the township?
that's.
I'm not
a-
asking you, I'm
No.
throwing this out for
Okay,
consideration.
I'm happy to answer, or we can sort of all stew on that question.
Let's stew on it.
Okay,
These are some of the things that I need to think about too.
sure.
All right, so at this point, we're going to continue until May 3rd,
Yes, you'll just need a motion to that. effect.
which,
It's in there somewhere.
yeah, I'm like,
Page 3.
3 at the top, continuance.
Yep.
And we'll do 6:30. All right, so I'll move to continue the public hearing for the subject zoning text map amendment dated February 14th, 2022 to create a Hoover Watershed Overlay District along with minor related modifications also known as ZC Case Number 2021-04, until May 3rd, 2022, at 6:30 PM in the Township Hall. Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, discussion? Roll call?
We'll call trustee Antonetts.
Yes.
Trustee Goodman. Trustee Vaughn.
Yes. All right. All right, anything else we need to discuss before we adjourn?
Nothing here.
All right, so I make a motion to adjourn at, sorry, what did I
Wait,
miss?
Excuse me, do
Go
we have to
ahead.
close this hearing first?
Yes,
Yeah, I
right,
guess
close it.
Adjourn?
you can
Thank
just
you.
announce it.
Yes, so I announce the closing of this hearing at 8:35 PM. So now I'll move to adjourn the meeting at 8:35 PM. Do I have a second?
Second?
All right, all, roll call.
Trustee Antonetts.
Yes.
Trustee Goodman.
Yes.
Trustee Vaughn.
Yes. Meeting adjourned at 8:35.